and James, so we'll get out sometime before the end of the century, I think. Okay. I'm not going to go all the way back to the first verse. We've gotten that several times. I just do want to get a running start, however, to verse 9, which is where we ended last week. Okay, we got the entire corrected translation of verse 9 plus the analysis. But verse 7, and remember verses 1 through 6, James is talking to reversionistic believers, and he's admonishing them. Okay, he's given us the reason as to why individuals will go reversionistic. They have lust. They want to do improper things with prayer. They're not functioning properly. They're outside of the divine dynasphere. And then he's given us information associated with what that will lead to, up to, including murder. We have the fact that you murder. Okay. So verse 7 says, "Therefore, you all be submitting to thee God." That's a command. Okay, and that's telling us that we have to get back in fellowship. We have to be resident and working in God's plan. At the same time, oppose, resist, and that means resist submitting yourselves to. It's a ellipsis of repetition. The slanderer, and that's Satan, and he will flee from you. And that's an important point that we brought up that many times believers don't realize that if they continue to function properly, if they continue to show Satan that they don't have a weakness in particular areas, then he will quit hitting them in those areas. So once it's important for you, this tells us, I'll slow down a second here, this tells us that it is very important for us to understand our areas of weakness. We have to be honest with ourselves. If we're not honest with ourselves, then we've already lost. Okay? You have to be honest with yourself so that you know how to properly use your volition. Okay? And you have to understand that Satan will figure out where your weaknesses are by the things that you do, the things that you say. Okay? It's important for you to realize you are never alone. You may think you're alone when you're by yourself in a dark room, or in the men's room or ladies' room or whatever, right? But there are angels with you at all times. There are fallen angels with you at all times, acting as spies, acting as information gatherers, so that they can feed Satan's giant computer, if you will, that will determine what your particular areas of weakness are by the way that you behave, the things that you say, the people you hang with, the music you listen to, the social sites you go to on the internet. All of those things are being watched, and all of those things are being fed. Okay? So it doesn't take Satan very long to figure out, or his minions, to figure out what your areas of weakness are. And then he's going to start banging on them. He's going to start trying to get you to respond to those areas of weakness and to get out of fellowship. Remember, nobody can pull you out of fellowship. Nobody can reach in the divine dynasphere and yank you out. You have to go out willingly. Okay? When you're out of fellowship, it's your fault. In the human nature, in most people, there's a little bit of arrogance, and you don't want to say it's my fault. And today, the way kids are being raised, nothing is ever their fault. Okay? And that is horrible, because that will never allow them to properly develop their volition and to understand, to be honest with themselves, and to understand when they've done something dumb, okay, and it's their fault, and they need to get back in fellowship. So anyway, Satan's going to get this information, and his army is going to be banging on you. Okay, and if you don't know, or if you always know, that's the point. If you don't want to recognize, if you don't want to admit that you have a particular area of weakness and you allow yourself to fall out, that's where you're always going to get attacked. Satan has limited resources. He's not going to attack you in areas where you have a stronghold. He's going to find that weakness. And so this verse tells us, okay, continue to make the proper choice. Avoid making the improper choice. Know your area of weakness. Make sure that you are constantly aware of that, and that you're trying, that you're working to shore that up. That you're getting the doctrine necessary to shore that up. Remember, 1 Corinthians tells us that we have, wherever there's a temptation, there's always the solution that's being provided. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have that solution. And that solution is making sure that you have enough doctrine in that particular area. When you know you have a weakness, get the information associated with fighting that weakness. Okay? You may not need information associated with lying. You may never have lied in your entire life. Okay? So you have a couple of basic passages, so that should that occur, the random chance that it occurs, you at least have the information associated to fight it, but you may have an area of weakness that's associated with drinking, or with sex, or with drugs, or with, those are the easy ones to pick on, right? Or any other form of arrogance. Those are the ones that you need to make sure that, and it'll come from this pulpit. We get enough doctrine, we get enough information. Wherever your area of weakness is, it's going to get hit. You're going to get information associated with it. And it's your responsibility to make sure that you've got those things in your promise notebooks. If you're working on those things, you get them memorized. You know where those areas are. So that when you get banged by Satan in those areas, you know how to fight it. Okay? That's why it's important that you have a personal promise notebook. That's why it's important that you have passages that are important and meaningful, okay, and useful to you. They're all useful, but there are those that are more useful to Jane than to Jack, okay, because Jane has a different area of weakness than Jack does, okay. So that's why you don't go to the Christian bookstore and buy a promise book and keep it in your pocket, and then anytime you need something, you thumb through it, You're supposed to have the doctrine, you're supposed to have all this doctrine in your soul, but you're supposed to have the doctrine, okay, that, and understand how to use everything, okay, but you need to make sure that you also keep current on the things that are attacking you all the time, okay. Some people are better with a sword than they are with a handgun, okay, but you need to have all of that in your armory. The Holy Spirit needs to have the weapons, and the weapons are doctrine, need to have the weapons to use, to give you the information so that you can fight anything that comes upon you. Okay? What I'm trying to say is I don't want you to walk and say, oh, okay, what he said is all I need to know is this kind of stuff, right? No, you're supposed to have the entire breadth of doctrine that you're getting. You're supposed to understand how to use all of the doctrines, okay? But you're also supposed to understand and have available, know exactly when to use those things that are associated with your area of weakness or your area of strength. Okay, I'm not saying discount the other stuff. All I am saying is, the stuff that's important to you, where you're getting attacked. And I keep saying important. It's all important. The stuff where you're getting attacked is the area where you need to make sure and continue to use over and over and over again. Because that, when you consistently show that you are not going to fail in that area of weakness, then Satan will flee from you. That's what this verse is telling us. Okay. Verse 8: Draw near to thee, God, and He will draw near to you. That also is a command. All of these are commands. Cleanse your hands, sinners, and that's associated with rebound. Okay? And purify your heart, slant right lobes. That's associated with getting doctrine. Okay? The way you purify is you get rid of the old sin, the human information that you have, and put in doctrinal information. So purify your heart, slant right lobes. You double-minded ones. And the idea here is you have to be of a single mind. You have to function properly on doctrine. You can't keep going, gee, I wonder what I should do with this. If this one is, if I can use my information here and God's information there, and that's what people do when they think that their religion, quote unquote, is only good for Sundays. Okay, remember, doctrine is supposed to be your life, not supposed to be a big part of your life. You're supposed to use doctrinal information for every decision that you make. Okay, and then we got verse 9. And verse 9, we got that last week, says, you will be miserable, and you will grieve, and you will weep. And all of these are underlined and giving us the importance of this. And these too are commands, and they're commands that are telling you that this is exactly what's going to happen to you unless you change, your mind, and you get back in fellowship. Let your laughter be turned, changed into grief. And that's that momentary happiness that you have, expressed by laughter. Okay, when you're out of fellowship and functioning in this cosmic system, okay, you may have moments of what you think is happiness, okay, and you have the laughter associated with it, but it doesn't stay, it doesn't last, and that's what we're being told here. Let your laughter be turned, changed into grief, and let your joy, gladness, be turned, changed. That's a ellipsis of repetition, into depression, gloom, and that's the permanent piece. The first one is the temporary. The second one is the permanent. Okay? When you get down into reverse process reversionism, you are going to be miserable, and you're going to be miserable for a long time. Okay? It's a permanent misery. You may have little bits of less misery than other times, okay, but you are never going to broach anything close to happiness, not even relative happiness. Right? And we'll see as we go on here a little bit later that a lot of times what that leads to is the only final choice, which is suicide. Okay, people get to the point where they just can't take it anymore. They've made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. God's given them the opportunity. He's given them warning discipline. He's given them intensive discipline. And finally, they've made such a bad decision, they only have one decision left. And that is, gun, knife, or rope. Okay, or unfortunately in today's day and age, because again, they don't want to, they are gutless, don't want to do it themselves. They end up having suicide by cop, right? They go and they threaten a poor police officer who has nothing, he has to defend, himself and do his job, and he ends up having to kill somebody, and that's unfortunate. Okay, so we got the analysis to verse 9. We saw in point 1 that the verse was composed of commands, and the idea is that the commands will be fulfilled. Okay, and they're going to be fulfilled unless the reversionistic believer does something to stop them from being fulfilled. And I gave you the example of the kid being in the middle of the road. Okay, point 2 was that the second person, our imperative first phrase with the second person includes the idea of you will become miserable. You have no choice in the outcome, and your volition will not be in play unless you change the path you're on. The phrase tells us that one of the end results of reversionism is this. Okay, point 3, we then have 2 mechanics that show this state. The reversionistic believer will grieve and will weep. And we saw some subpoints associated with that. Point 4, we saw that in the second sentence. James answers the reversionistic believers who have not yet reached the point in the first sentence. These are the believers who are thinking, I'm happy, I don't feel miserable, I don't need to cry. And what James is leading to in this sentence is the fact that they will have periods of -H, which may be where they are now, but it will always be followed by misery. Okay? Point 5, the first thing that we see is that if you follow the principle of reversionism, i.e. refusing or denying doctrine, then your -H will convert to punishment, misery, and therefore your laughter will turn to grief. This is related to all categories of personal love. Right man, right woman will be destroyed. Friendship will be destroyed. The only true friends you have are going to separate from you, of course. And then it started off, of course, with your loss of personal love for God. So that form of love is also gone. Point 6, we saw the verb matatrepo is in the passive, and the passive indicates for us that this malfunction started out being fun, then turned to grief. In other words, grief was received and therefore not there already. So the first thing that happens is that the fun and laughter begin to be replaced more and more with grief and misery. Okay, and these are the temporary manifestations. And James gives us this information not only so that we can recognize those around us, okay, who may be in this situation, so we know to separate, but also so that you have this information and holy cow, if my laughter is being turned into grief, okay, if I'm having more and more episodes of grief and misery, I better look inside myself here. I better figure out what's going on. I need to get back in fellowship and get square again and start getting information and start functioning properly. Okay, I'm on the wrong path. I need to change my path. Okay, I need to get off this railroad and get on the next one. The better one. Then James gets to the permanent manifestations. Is what point 7 says. Even the properly functioning believer who's sharing the happiness of God at +H does not laugh all the time, but just because he's not laughing, he still does have a relaxed mental attitude and internal happiness. But here James is telling us that joy, gladness, which should be permanent, is temporary for the reversionist. Okay, and his joy, gladness will lead to mental anguish and depression, gloom. Okay, and I gave you an example of typical chemical happiness, such as drug or excessive alcohol use. While in chemical, they can feel exuberance or great happiness, but once it wears off, they hit bottom and they're even lower than what they started with to begin with. Okay, drug addicts never get better because of drug use. Okay, I think that's a pretty obvious fact. Okay, same thing with alcoholics. Okay, they may seem happy while they're soused. Okay, but once they come down, it's miserable. Okay, nobody says, "Oh, gee, I want to wake up in the bathroom with my head in the toilet. That's what I want to do tonight." Right? But that's exactly what starts to happen. Okay, so that is not happiness. And then point 8, this is still in review. Point 8 tells us that James wants these believers and us to understand the outcome of reversionism. Reversionism is the status of perpetual self-misery. Okay? That is perpetual self-misery. These commands are going to be obeyed through the process of reversionism, and that's why Colonel Thiem called it reverse process reversionism. It's the process. Okay, that's going to happen. It's not dependent on you. Okay, in as much as exactly, in as much as the process playing out, it's dependent on you continuing to make your bad volitional choices. But what I'm saying is the process is very well known. Okay, you can say that if you start here and you make this bad decision and this bad decision, it's going to result, okay, in this. And I kind of gave you the example of writing good software and following a process to get software out. Well, the same thing happens here. Okay, there's a process. And if you start that process and you exercise that process, it doesn't matter who you are, okay, the result of that process is going to be the same. Okay, and ultimately it will be the sin unto death. Okay? And point 9 basically said that life's too short. James understands that. Okay? And God has provided a different process for the believer to follow. Okay, the whole verse is so that the reversionistic believer can identify his state and pull out, okay, before he suffers the sin unto death. And the idea, of course, is that's what James isn't giving this to say, okay, ha ha on you, right? He's not giving this to punish the people even more. What he's trying to do, obviously, is give the information to say, recognize the state you're in and get out of it. Okay, pull out, and this is how you do it. Okay, and we saw that if you're a properly functioning believer, okay, or not properly functioning, but if you're a recovering reversionistic believer, okay, we see that verses 8 and 10 go together, and you can skip verse 9. Okay, but verse 9 is no. If you continue to follow the process and you don't start recovery, then this is what's going to lead to. This is what it's going to lead to. Okay. So I very quickly wanted to go over the negative growth stages, because we haven't had those for a little bit. We had them about 2 years ago when we were going through the Pseudo ECS, or the fake edification complex of the soul. We were talking about Satan's counterfeit. So you may remember this picture. Okay, and we start off. I'm not going to go slow enough that you can write all this down, because you have it in the category of the Pseudo ECS. But I'm going to go over and review the different floors. So first, remember we have the line here. Okay, that's the area when you first become a believer. Okay, and we end up, you have positive growth or negative growth, and this is the representation of the negative growth. And we have a couple left here that shows the two different growth paths. So anyway, the foundation of the negative growth is the leadership, guidance, and direction of the old sin nature. And that's why we have that right there. It's known as the flesh in Romans 7:18 and Romans 8:3 and 4. It's known as the body of sin in Romans 6:6. The sin that rules the mortal body in Romans 6:12. The old man in Ephesians 4:22 and Colossians 3:9. And Romans 6:6a when compared with Genesis 3:7. We understand that the tactical sphere of operation is the cosmic system. Okay, it's extremely important for the church age believer to realize that as a result of his possession of free will in the angelic conflict, he is the one who controls his own soul. So this is exactly what this phrase is, this whole verse here is telling us. It's your control. Okay, James, when we introduced the book of James, one of the things that I said the book is going to tell us entirely about is the play of volition, okay, in the angelic conflict. And that's why it's a very important book, and it's a book for mature believers, because now we have the doctrinal information to know exactly how to make the choices that we need to make. Okay, and this information now is very understandable to us, because it tells us exactly how we should apply our volition. Okay, so you start off with the effects of the old sin nature. Okay, that's the basis of this. Okay, you got to kind of turn this upside down. When you say foundation, it's kind of weird to have a foundation at the top. Okay, but you can imagine that you're building down. Imagine that you're in Tempe and you're in the Tempe town center. For those of you that have never seen it, Tempe, the city of Tempe, what used to be their city offices, I think they've moved it now or whatever, but what used to be their city offices is an upside down pyramid. Okay, so the top floor, it looks like this. The top floor is bigger than the bottom floor. Anyway, so then after you've got the effects of the old sin nature coming into play, then the next thing, of course, is what we call the distraction stage. And this is distraction from doctrine. Okay, and even though I'm not going slow enough to get it word for word, I'll slow down a little bit so that you can get points if you want. Okay, and it's the desire. This is the desire to satiate the temptation and lust that leads to the individual getting out of fellowship and emotional revolt in the first place. Now, where have we seen this? We just saw this in the first part of chapter 4 of James. Okay, this is the distraction. This is the lust. Okay. By acting on these lusts, the individual rejects doctrine and focuses on on that which they think will make them happy. Okay? And so they start looking for what makes them happy. Right? That's the third stage. This third stage is called the reaction stage. So you have distraction. Okay, I'm not getting doctrine. I'm going to go focus on what I think makes me happen. And then you have reaction, and that's known as the frantic search for happiness. The reaction stage is the fact that when you start looking for it, you can't find it. It's elusive. And the reason is because the only way you can have true happiness is in the divine dynasphere with a completed edification complex of the soul and a proper relationship with God. That's where true happiness is. When you get distracted and you let that go, then the reaction is going to be, I'm looking for happiness and I can't find it. Right? The easy example to understand, and the one that we tend to use again, is drugs. Okay, start off with simple drugs. Ooh, I get a little bit of a high from pot, right? From marijuana, whatever you want to call it. Okay, but gee, it's only a little bit, right? And it's not sustaining. I wonder what it's like to take crack, or I wonder what it's like, or I guess the starter drug, the designer drug these days, or at least maybe 8-10 years ago, was ecstasy, right? Start off with ecstasy, and then you got to go on to something stronger, and pretty soon you're mainlining heroin, or whatever the designer drug is, right? And you still have no happiness, because what? Because when you come off, you have that really big, downside. Okay? And so you can't find happiness. So you're in this frantic search for happiness. It just leads you further and further and further into the cosmic system. Okay, same thing, the other one Jack used to use, same thing as with the lonely girl, right? She's lonely, she doesn't have any friends. Okay, so she decides the way to make friends, okay, is to put out, okay, is to get into sexual promiscuity. Okay, and the next thing you know, she's the high school, girl that everybody talks about, right? And now certainly she has no friends. So here she thought she was going down a path to get her more friends, and she has no friends. And now she's being avoided. Now she's being avoided by girls who would maybe have been her friends eventually, okay? But they want nothing to do with her because they don't want to be associated with her, because then they'll get tapped by with that same label, okay? And the guys, okay, only wanted to have one thing from her, and it's not friendship. Okay, so that she goes into a frantic search for happiness, and it leads to more and more degeneration. Okay, that's this stage. Okay, and it can manifest itself in two ways. The way we always talk about is lasciviousness. That's that. But you also have asceticism. Asceticism is when you are acting as if you're more righteous than others. Okay, and so you're going to become extremely strict. Right, and next thing you know, you find yourself in a commune where everybody's extremely strict as you are, and you all wear prairie dresses and black suits. Okay, and you're still not happy, right? And then in our nation, the government decides to come in and kill you all. But anyway. Sorry, I backed that up. Colonel Thiem used to call this Operation Boomerang, okay? And so you have the original distraction is intensified in a frantic search for happiness, and you're more miserable and in a much worse condition. And pretty soon, you're looking back at the bad days as being the good old days, okay? And then you go into an emotional revolt of the soul, okay? That's... What happened here? There we go. I missed that. I'm sorry. I didn't give you the fourth one, the third one, which is the intensification. Okay, that's Operation Boomerang. Okay, and that's where you have the original distraction is intensified, and the frantic search of happiness it doesn't provide the desired state, and so you're more miserable. Okay, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Then we have emotional revolt of the soul. In an emotional revolt of the soul, this is where the believer's emotion starts to dominate his right lobe on a regular basis. Okay, so anything the emotion wants, the emotion gets. And we always look at the emotion as the responder. See, when you look at it from a right man, right woman perspective, the woman is supposed to be the responder to the right man. Okay? Well, the emotion is supposed to be the responder to the right lobe of the soul. Okay? And so you're supposed to have the doctrine in the right lobe that is leading your life, and then emotion can respond. It's not bad to have emotion. You're not supposed to wipe out all emotion. Emotion was created by God, and it's good. Okay? It's good to have emotion, but it has to be properly used. It has to be used as a response to the information that you have. It can't control the soul. Emotion can't think. Remember, when we go through the soul, you have your vocabulary and your categories and your norms and standards, and you have all the things that lead to the wisdom at the end. Okay? Emotion doesn't have any of that. Emotion can't think. If you think emotion can think, you haven't been watching movies very often where people just go into this emotional blithering state, right? You know, and what happens? They do something really dumb, right? Because they're not thinking. Well, emotional revolt of the soul is when you're operating on the non-thinking part of your soul on a regular basis and you're just emoting. If it feels good, do it, right? And I went through and gave you a whole example of an individual in England that started a whole religion based on if it feels good, do it. Okay? And the idea is that what happens is eventually the choices that emotion leads you into are all the wrong choices, right? Because there's no thought process there. You don't get yourself back into fellowship, and you don't start using your doctrine again. And we'll see that's one of the forms that ultimately leads. This is the process that ultimately will lead to the sin and the death. This emotional revolt of the soul that continues to cause you to get further and further down into reversionism. Okay, this ultimately what leads to the suicide. Suicide is not a thoughtful process. Okay, suicide is the ultimate height of the end result of emotion that gets you to only one choice. Okay. Then we have negative volition toward doctrine, and that's supposed to be an arrow. So it's negative volition towards doctrine. This is the fifth floor. In this stage, the believer, as a result of malfunctioning emotion and continued distraction, becomes antagonistic toward God, the plan of God, and the Word of God. Here, the believer doesn't want to hear anything related to the truth. Anything related to doctrine causes him enough emotional pain that he doesn't want to hear it. At this point, when your emotions have taken over, right, you swing back and forth. This is the constantly kind of like what they call the bipolar, right? Your emotions, you're either extreme quote unquote happiness or extreme quote unquote misery. Okay, you're really miserable. It doesn't matter which part that you're on. Okay, you just think you're happy, but the problem is when you get to this point. Okay, this negative volition towards doctrine, someone comes to you and tries to talk to you about doctrine, tries to talk to you about doctrinal concepts, and it is painful. It's painful because, one, subconsciously it reminds you of where you're supposed to be and not where you are. Okay? And two, it's an affront to the emotion that you're operating on. It's telling you that you're operating on emotion and you need to operate on thought. And we go back to the point that people's arrogance tell them they're not wrong, right? And so they don't want to hear this because what doctrine does at this point in phrase, the only thing doctrine can do is tell them that they're wrong. And they don't want to hear that. Okay? And in some cases, it becomes so extreme that it becomes almost physically painful for them to hear doctrine. Okay? They go running and screaming. I don't want to hear that. Right? And that's when they break the apostasy, what we call the apostasy barrier. And this is like cracking, on the other side we have cracking the maturity barrier. This is cracking the apostasy barrier. And this leads to the final stages of reversionism. And the first stage of apostasy is called the blackout of the soul. This is known, this stage is associated with the vacuum in the soul that the Greek calls the mataiotes vacuum. Okay? This word is often translated as worthless or vain, but it has secondary meanings. The first is emptiness, and then from that it's extended to futility. When a vacuum is formed, it's designed to be filled. And what happens here is this vacuum of the soul, created by the lack or rejection or removal of doctrine, creates a hole that sucks in human viewpoint and evil. Okay? So the blackout of the soul is the first part, and what happens now, since you're negative to doctrine, your soul is now open to all forms of evil. When you watch something on the news and you say, how in the world could someone do that to someone else? Okay? that person could very well be a believer, and this is the stage they're in. How can they do it? Because it's associated with evil. Okay? And you're sucking in evil. If you have no truth, the only thing you can suck in is falsehood. Okay? I always get a chuckle. Well, I'm an old fart in terms of technology nowadays. And I used to program in C++, which nobody does anymore, or in C, which absolutely nobody does anymore. Okay, and in C, when you had what they call a Boolean, a logic statement, okay, 0 was true, everything else was false. And I always got a chuckle out of that because that's exactly what we have here. There is only one truth. Everything else is false. And if you think about it from numbers, if, in the programming language, 0 is true, everything else, that means infinity is false, right? There's a million ways, an infinite number of ways to be wrong and only one way to be right. And when you've gotten to this point, where you're not accepting right, then everything you take in, everything that you suck in, everything that you resonate to, everything that you think is great is wrong. Okay? Then we have once you have that, then you start putting that stuff into your soul, and it starts replacing the good information that you have. And so this is called the scar tissue of the soul. And this is identified many times in the Bible with the phrase hardness of heart. Oh, by the way, I forgot to give you 3 verses that were associated with the last stage, blackout of the soul. If you're taking notes, you can put in Romans 8:20, Ephesians 4:17, and 2 Peter 2:18. So then when we get to scar tissue of the soul, or hardness of the heart, this is the second stage of deep reversionism. This is the stage where, as a result of the believer's soul accepting only human viewpoint and evil, all good information or divine viewpoint is cut out of the right lobe of the soul and replaced by human viewpoint and evil. That human viewpoint and evil, replacing that, the doctrine being cut out, is what we call scar tissue. And just like scar tissue in the body, it doesn't function like the original was designed to. Scar tissue of the soul doesn't function at all like that which was originally designed by God. So now you're starting to replace all the information in your right lobe. You've gone past the point of just having motion. Now you're taking all of this junk that's being sucked in here, And I think about it, when we talk about a Mateotes vacuum, when you think about, the vacuum, and some of the things vacuums suck up, right? That's exactly what starts then to get populated into your soul. Okay? The horrible information, the horrible stuff starts to get populated, starts to replace the good information you have. And now what's happening is your emotion, okay, which started this whole thing, is now actually taking that information and feeding it back. Okay, your soul, the information in your soul is being replaced so that your emotion can start responding on this really bad information. Right? So it starts to become almost a self-fulfilled prophecy, right? That's what this process is all about. Okay? You dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Right? It's like, I'm going to pop out the other side of the earth. That's how I'm going to go from digging into the earth to coming out of the earth. It doesn't work. Okay? You melt somewhere around the center of the earth. Okay? You can't dig to China. Okay? So you can't get out of a hole by digging the hole deeper. Okay? That's the point there. I mean, it's pretty logical in a physical world, but in this, people don't seem to understand that. Right? And then the final stage is what we call reverse process reversionism. Okay? And reverse process reversionism is the stage of negative growth that Satan wants all members of the human race to end up in. Okay? Here the individual is exactly 180 degrees out of phase with God, the plan of God, and the Word of God. Okay? At this point, he is perfectly oriented to Satan's plan rather than God's plan. And he's operating entirely on human good and evil. Okay? At this point, he's obviously not in the arrogance complex, he's in the hatred complex. He has nothing to do with God, the plan of God, and the Word of God. He doesn't want to hear anything about it. It does exactly opposite from what it says. Okay? And at this point, if the individual is a believer, okay, there's only 2 reasons, or only 2 things that God can do with him. One is leave him around as an example for what not to do to other believers, okay? Or take him home with the sin unto death. And at that point, when he takes you home with the sin unto death, don't forget, even when you get to this point, you're not going to lose your salvation, right? So the individual is going to be saved. He's going to end up, he's still saved. He's going to end up in heaven, spending eternity in heaven with God. but he's not going to have any reward. There's going to be misery and everything associated with his temporal rewards here on earth. Okay, so he's not going to have any of that. So the storehouse, the escrow blessings that are in his warehouse that he was supposed to get, had he functioned properly, he's never going to get. Okay, so when he gets to heaven, he can go to the warehouse and he can look, and his escrow, his escrow blessings are going to all be there in the room. He's going to say, "Wow, I could have had that." Okay, and he's not going to have any eternal rewards. Okay, except spending eternity in heaven with God. Right? This is an individual, no pillar, no crowns, no nothing, like the mature believer will get. Okay, he's going to be essentially naked, yet so as through fire. Right? Everything is going to get burned up. Okay, and he's going to come on the other side smelling like smoke and naked, and that's it. Okay. And whereas we will be kings or lords, king over kings and lord over lords, we will have areas where we will be able to rule. He's going to have, the latrine to clean, that type of thing. Okay, the idea is that's it. Okay, and he's going to go, oops. But remember, there's not going to be any regret or any sorrow at that point, and probably for the first time in many people's lives. Okay, or existence. I shouldn't say lives, because we've had an eternal existence. At that point, there's going to be the first time in many individuals' existence where they're going to say, "That was all my fault." Okay? And I have no regrets, no remorse. I understand that God is perfectly fair. Had I done that, I'd have gotten this, and I didn't, so I don't. And I understand, and I'm happy with it. Remember, there's not going to be any sorrow, okay, in heaven. They're not going to walk around going, "Oh, poor me, I could have had this." Right? Instead, they're going to say, "I understand the greatness of God, I understand the justice of God, and in fact, I'm glad I didn't get that because I didn't deserve it. I didn't do what was necessary to get it. He did. Good on it." Right? Okay. So, once you reach this last stage, this reverse process reversion remission stage, then the end result, of course, if you don't recover, is going to be the sin unto death. Okay? And that's given to us in 1 John 5:16. What we need to understand, and what we need to recall, is the fact that there is a difference between suffering and suffering circumstances. Okay, when we talk about this misery, when we talk about this suffering that James has, it is true suffering. It's not suffering circumstances like a believer may have. And we've studied the difference between that. We understand that suffering circumstances are those instances where God provides or allows the circumstances to exist that would bring pressure and suffering to the believer were he not in fellowship and functioning properly. However, because he doesn't suffer. Instead, it's a test. He passes the test. It could be for advanced growth. It could be for accelerated growth. It could be a demonstration to those around. Okay? But through his positive volition and the plan of God, okay, he demonstrates the capacities, his use of the capacity that God has given him, and he has more and greater capacity. That's suffering circumstances. That's the individual who is in the trailer park when the tornado comes through and rips and takes everything he's got, okay, the last 50 years to build up, right, just goes whoosh and becomes splinters, right? And when the newsman comes up to him and says, "How do you feel?" He says, "You know what? The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the Lord. I'm fine. Those are just things. I'm still alive. I still got the opportunity to function and grow. I'm okay." That's a suffering circumstance. The individual's not suffering. His next door neighbor, same situation. Everything he had, whoosh, it goes away and turns into a splinter. The newsman goes to him, and he's crying and weeping and miserable. And, "Oh my gosh, that's everything I've ever had. I've lost everything. I can't believe this. I'm going to go to the garden and eat worms. I'll never get it all back." Right? That's suffering. Okay? That's the difference. Okay? Okay? And so, with true suffering, okay, it arises from the believer's own thoughts, decisions, and actions. A bad decision follows another until the life becomes very miserable. Okay, he makes a shamble of his present experience, and he destroys future options. Okay, and of course, what you have to remember is nobody can devastate your life except you through your own decisions. You are today what you are because of the decisions that you've made. You function properly and follow God's plans, and you will be in a great place with lots of opportunities. You make bad decisions, you decide to go against God's plan, and every bad decision you make is going to limit and reduce any other decisions that you can make. It's your volition, and that's what James is pointing out. Okay? We have to understand is that as you begin this self-destructive process, God's going to intervene with divine discipline. God is a perfect parent. You don't want to stand by and watch your kid do dumb stuff, right? God doesn't want to stand by and watch you do dumb stuff. So when we studied suffering and suffering circumstances, when we studied divine discipline, remember we studied that there are 3 forms of discipline. Okay? There's excuse me. There's the first form, okay, which is to wake you up and make you understand. Okay, and then we have intensive discipline. You don't respond to the first form of discipline, and then you have intensive discipline. It gets worse. Okay, and finally, when you don't rebound, get back in fellowship, and you don't start functioning properly with intensive discipline, then we have dying discipline, or the sin unto death. Okay, so you have warning discipline, intensive discipline. I don't think I said warning discipline. It's first. So we have warning discipline, intensive discipline, and dying discipline, or the sin unto death. Okay. And these are progressive. Mild discipline gives way to more and more severe discipline. If a believer fails to respond, and the one refuses to live in fellowship, he receives warning, and then he gets more miserable, and then he has intensive, and then finally dying. Discipline, okay, by definition, of course, divine discipline is the sum total of punitive action taken by the justice of God in grace to correct, to punish, to encourage, to train, to motivate the believer's free will toward the protocol plan of God. And we've understood divine discipline is for believers only. That's given to us in Hebrews 12:8. And it occurs only in this life. There is no discipline in eternity. And that's Revelation 21:4. Okay? So, we've studied divine discipline many times. It happens as you're going down through here. Okay? And we have the warning discipline is given to us in Revelation 3:20. This is the I stand at the door and knock phrase. Okay, that has nothing to do with salvation. That has to do with discipline. Then we have intensive discipline, and that's used to make a bigger impact on the believer. And that's Isaiah 42:3. And then finally we have dying discipline, which is given to us in 1 John 5:16. And this is the final form of logistical grace. This is logistical grace. Divine discipline, dying discipline, is a blessing. Okay? It's a discipline, but it's a blessing. It's grace. Okay? And so in our categorical study of discipline, we studied all of these. But because it's pertinent here for the review of this information, and because it's pertinent for what James has been teaching, we're going to get a little review of dying discipline, or the sin unto death. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and give it to you as a quick review of the topic in its own short category. And so this, I will slow down long enough for you to get point by point. Because we had dying discipline, we had the sin unto death as a part of divine discipline. But here I want to pull it out and get very specific with the sin unto death. Because what we understand from James is as you continue to function in this downward negative growth, okay, that is the end result if you don't pull out. That's what he was trying to tell us, right? Pull out, get right with God, get back in fellowship, and start growing. Okay, get the information you need to pull out and start growing. So you can start a new category. It's category sin unto death. I can't get this guy to go step by step by step, so you're going to get ahead of me here, but that's okay. We'll start off with point 1, definition. The sin unto death is the maximum punitive discipline from God to the reversionistic believer. So point A, the sin unto death is meted out, that's M-E-T-E-D, is meted out to the reversionistic believer who who has consistently refused to rebound and return to God's plan for his life. This discipline is the final form of divine discipline and is what leads to the believer's death. No reversionistic believer ever died without dying the sin unto death. Semicolon. See, death is just another, is just another weapon in Satan's arsenal. The fear of death is just another weapon in Satan's arsenal, right? He wants everybody to be afraid to die. As properly functioning believers and as mature believers, we're not to be afraid to die. Why would we be afraid to die? To go home, okay? To be recalled as an ambassador to the home in which we live, okay? To go into the kingdom, to be with God in eternity, okay? Spend eternity forever with God. Why is that bad? How is that a bad thing? Okay, it's not. So why do you fear it? It's just a change of, a change of environment. You go from being here on earth to being in heaven. Okay, no fear, unless you're a reversionistic believer. Then, if you're a reversionistic believer, you are going to die the sin unto death, and the process of dying is going to be misery. It doesn't matter whether it happens in an instant, you get hit by a Mack truck and that's it, or if it's a long, slow process. The sin unto death is guaranteed, as discipline, to be misery. And as a reversionistic believer, you never have dying grace. You always have dying discipline. Okay? Dying blessing of dying discipline, the sin unto death. So we had semicolon. It is the exact opposite of dying grace, comma, which is the maximum reward for the properly functioning mature believer in time, period. So it's the sphere you're in that determines whether it's dying grace or the sin unto death. Okay? Two individuals, two soldiers, one properly functioning mature soldier, okay, in a foxhole, another one a reversionistic soldier that's all the way down here, okay, so we're in reverse process reversionism. Okay? Mortar comes in, kills them both. One case, it's dying discipline, the other case, it's dying grace. Okay? So point B. The sin unto death includes maximum self-induced misery. The reversionistic believer is allowed by God to produce self-induced misery as a part of this discipline. that self-induced misery doesn't have to be physical pain. Right? In most cases, as a matter of fact, that self-induced misery is associated with mental attitude. Mental attitude of fear, anguish, all of those things that turn a person's soul into water. Okay, in particular, the example that I gave, for example, the two individuals in the foxhole. The reversionistic believer is there until the mortar hits. The entire time he's there, he's worried about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I'm going to get killed. He has all of these horrible mental attitude sins, okay, that are leading to terror. That's self-induced misery. Terror is not happiness. Okay? It leads to terror, it leads to self-induced misery. Okay? On the other hand, you got the individual that's with him, that's a properly functioning, mature believer, and he's thinking about, I wonder, what God has in store for me now. I'm going to continue to do my function. I'm going to fight the enemy until I can't fight him anymore. I'm going to do my job. What a wonderful opportunity God's given me to be here, to represent my country, to represent God, to show strength when I myself am a coward. My own merit, I have the strength of God, and here I am. He's put me in an opportunity where I can show others, okay, what a properly functioning Christian can do as a soldier. So you got the one guy that's got happiness, he's got trust in the Lord, he's got a proper mental attitude, he's sharing the happiness of God, he's got everything going for him. You got the other guy right next to him that has self-induced misery. He's got terror. Okay? And then boom. One has dying discipline, the other one has dying grace. Okay? I had a page and a half of entirely different example here, and I'm not going to get into it because as I started this one, I think it makes the point. Okay? So continue the point. The sin unto death, then, is maximum pressure terminating in physical death of the believer. Reading this passage, we're going to get again 1 John 5:16. Compared with Psalm 118, 17 and 18. And subpoint C, as you can see, has 4 points underneath it. We only have 5 minutes left. So subpoint C is where we'll go ahead boink, and pick it back up at the second class. Oops. Okay, so that's what we'll pick it up on the second class. And we're going to use the last 5 minutes to get into true spiritual giving. So we understand that the timetable and the concept of true spiritual giving is located in 1 Corinthians 16:2. On the first day of every week, let each one of you, according to his own judgment, be putting aside and saving, according to how we might be prospering. And of course, the point that we always bring out here is the fact that we have prosperity as the focal point. If you understand that you have a right job and who provided that right job, then you understand then you understand who is providing the prosperity, and as a result, you will function properly with that prosperity. If you have prosperity, one of the dictates and the principle of true spiritual giving then is found in 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each one should give just as he himself has decided what is the right amount in his heart, slant right load, not out from sorrow, pain, distress, slant reluctance relating to the personal loss of funds, nor out from compulsion, slant pressure. For you see, the God keeps on loving a cheerful, satisfied giver. So the idea there is you're not supposed to have internal pressure, external pressure. You're not supposed to feel bad by what you give or don't give, and you're not supposed to be pressured into giving or not giving. You're not supposed to be told that things are going to happen if you don't give. Try to be blackmailed, because that will get you out of fellowship. And of course, the only way that you can be a cheerful, satisfied giver is to be in fellowship. And then we have a dictate and promise of blessing related to true spiritual giving in Proverbs 3:9 and 10. Honor the Lord. That means to recognize and appreciate the Lord. and not yourself as the true source of prosperity. Honor the Lord from your prosperity and from the first of all your income. So if you truly understand and appreciate that God is the source of your right job, when you receive the benefits of that job, the first thing you'll think of is God. Okay? From the first of all your income. And then we have, and if you do, your storehouses shall be filled with superabundance, and your vats shall overflow with new wine. The idea being that when you demonstrate the proper use of the capacities that you have, you're also showing that you have, you could handle more and greater capacity, and that's exactly what God is going to give to you. And then we have the fact that the real issue in true spiritual giving is doctrine resonant in the soul, and the fact that the doctrine is the true wealth of God's economy, plus a very important warning given to us in 2 Corinthians 8:12. For if positive volition based upon doctrine is present, this is perfectly acceptable to the degree that he might be having. The idea being that positive volition itself with an exhale of temporal prosperity from 0 to maximum is perfectly acceptable as the only thing offered in true spiritual giving. It then goes on to say it is not perfectly acceptable to the degree that he is not having. So the idea is even if you function properly with spiritual giving and then turn around and make a promise to pay something that you don't have, okay, you have destroyed that positive volition. You have destroyed the process of true spiritual giving. Okay, this is a memorial for what you have. This is not an opportunity for you to blackmail God and say, okay, I'm going to give this amount of money, I expect to get it back. Okay, you cannot write an IOU to God. Okay, and so the idea is that if you are not prospered temporally and you would like to be able to give temporally, then you can go to God in prayer. Okay, and by properly using prayer, you will receive an answer. It may be a negative answer, which you then know if you don't get any prosperity, you know, okay, God, it's not in God's plan for my life to give temporally. I'll continue to just give spiritually. That's fine. Okay, or if you are given prosperity, then you know, okay, that's a positive answer. I've gotten prosperity now, and now it's time for me to go ahead and give back to God, part of this prosperity in recognition of the fact that He answered my prayer positively and that I understand and appreciate true spiritual giving. Okay, but in either case, you can function properly. Okay, and that's given to us in 2 Corinthians 9:8. It says, "Now thee God keeps on being manifestly able to richly provide all grace to you, in order that while always having complete self-sufficiency in everything," meaning that you have everything necessary to function properly in God's plan for your life, whether you're a father or providing for your family or whatever. Okay, he goes on to say, "You might be providing richly to for every divine good work production." Okay, and the idea is if it's God's desire to provide blessing to enable the believer to fulfill his capacity for giving, then God has all the power in the universe to do so. Okay, so with that said, we're going to go ahead now and give you the opportunity to go to God in prayer and exhale back to Him in the spiritual area. And we're going to go ahead and pass the container around, and you can give Him the temporal area if you've been prospered, and that is your decision. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity on a continuing basis to function properly in the memorial of true spiritual giving, to be able to give to you in both a spiritual and temporal opportunity or area, to be able to understand and focus on the fact that you have given us prosperity. You've given us doctrinal prosperity in terms of giving us a plan, giving us then a way to execute that plan, everything necessary to execute that plan, including a local church, the information given from the local church, and then the ability to take that information and cycle it properly in our souls and to use it in our everyday life, to use it on a moment-by-moment basis. This is true prosperity. And we thank you for the opportunity to recognize that, and we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we'll go ahead and close with a song. If you stand, we're going to sing song number 92.